different groups, people for trade unions, people for community campaigns, different political groups. I'm alright, thanks. And people for the Yes movement as well, because that's what we need. We need to unite, and we need a broad coalition to fight against the cuts and the cost of living crisis that we're all facing together. Today we are here to start the fight back. We're here to say to our governments that enough is enough. They made us pay for the banking crisis with austerity and cuts. They made us pay for the pandemic with our own lives. Poverty pay for key workers, not enough PPE. And throughout that period, the richest 1% doubled their income, while the rest of us were left to struggle. Now they're trying to make us pay for the energy crisis. And we have to tell them very clearly, we are not paying for this crisis. We can't pay, we won't pay, and you must pay. The exploitation of working people has to end now. We can no longer accept a broken economic system that doesn't do a job for working people. Pay has been suppressed for decades, while the rich have sucked profits out of our economy and continue to do so. And you know what? They're going to keep continuing to do so unless we do something about it and we stop them. And how dare the bankers tell us, how dare they tell us that we have to exercise restraint? If they had exercised restraint and not had excessive greed for these past decades, they wouldn't have run our country into the ground, and good hard-working families wouldn't have to choose between feeding their children and heating their homes. So now is not the time for restraint. Now is the time for trade unionists and workers to stand up and fight back. And the politicians, the corporate bosses and the billionaires are not going to listen to us. They're not going to share this country's wealth unless we make them. So we need to build a big, broad and angry alliance. We need to build and mobilise power, and that starts in our workplaces and it starts in our communities. And we need to keep getting people out in the streets in the weeks and months ahead until we build an alliance that is so big and so powerful that the politicians and the bosses won't have a choice but to listen. The changes we need are many. We need to make sure that we demand an immediate freeze on energy bills. We need to fund that freeze by taxing the excessive profits made by the energy companies and the multinationals. We need to end the endemic poverty pay that our workers are working under. Right across Scotland's economy, it's an absolute scandal.
And here's Gordon.
30% of working adults in Scotland
joining us this morning
are the only ones earning over 25,000 a year, and almost half of working adults in Scotland earn under £15,000 a year. That is a scandal, and we need to stop it. And we need to stop it. And we need to ensure that our essential services, like transport, like energy, like care, that these essential services are publicly owned and publicly controlled. So instead of hikes on our national insurance and taxing the poor, let's tell them to tax the rich. Let's tell them to tax the billionaires and the multinationals. They can afford it. They've been getting away with literally murder for years we need to movement build, we need to organise and work hard and build a broad alliance. When we join together, we have more power than we can dare to imagine. And they cannot afford to ignore us, because at the end of the day, we are the many and they are the few. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. Absolutely first class. I'd now like to invite Shami Chakrabarti Labour Peer, former Director of Liberty, to address you. Please welcome Shami, please.
Hi there. I'm the lucky person that has to follow that. I come from south of the border, bringing solidarity from London. Indeed. That's, I'm really sorry, I'm a lifelong Londoner, but it's pretty embarrassing at the moment because it's a city of food banks next to investment banks. And that is a cause of great pain and shame to me. I see padlocks on food fridges in supermarkets. That makes me feel physically sick. Why do you need to put a padlock on a food fridge? You know those fridges where you have little pieces of fish and little pieces of chicken? Why would you put a padlock on there? A homeless person hasn't got anywhere to cook the piece of fish or the piece of chicken. So you know it must be people, my neighbours, living and working in houses and flats in that part of London who are tempted to steal the food. It seems to me that the pandemic has been like a modern day parable for every injustice on the planet. Go to work if you can go to work, but stay at home if you can't stay at home, and I'll just do what the fuck I like. Well, you know, I think that recent weeks and recent days even in London have demonstrated that people power does matter. Public opinion does matter if it speaks like this and it speaks loudly enough. After scandal upon scandal that has rocked trust in the Metropolitan Police Service, women being raped and murdered by serving police officers, and then peaceful vigils ending with young women being handcuffed on the ground and dragged away, and scandal after scandal, banter that includes racist, misogynist, homophobic abuse. Finally, the Commissioner has been forced to resign. But where Dick has gone, Johnson must follow. We are grateful, no doubt, to be alive through this terrible pandemic, where the United Kingdom has lost more civilian lives than in the whole of World War II. Because to these people, life is cheap, but not to us. So, friends, let's stand together, because even in these desperate times, an old-fashioned word has come back into fashion. You've heard it today several times already. And that is a magic word. And the word, of course, is solidarity. And why is it a magic word? It's a magic word because it doesn't just describe where we're heading. It describes the means of transport as well. So rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable numbers. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shami. Excellent contribution. The next speaker is Gordon Martin, one of the regional organisers from the RMT in Scotland. After Gordon, I'm asking Lilian from UNISON to be on standby. Lilian is an NEC member of UNISON and Convener. And after Lilian, we'll have Stevie Dillon from Unite, who's an organiser for the construction sector. And after Stevie, we'll have Mercedes Villalba, who is the Labour MSP for North East Scotland. So please welcome Gordon Martin from the RMT. Gordon.
Thanks, Phil. No, as I look out here at the banners and flags, there's so many correct statements out there. Tax the rich, absolutely. Jail the politicians, I think is something that's missing and is something that should be there. Corrupt to the core, stinking, rotten Johnston and others, the jail they should be in. They've killed people, and we need to be clear here. We're talking about cuts, kill. It's time to kill the cuts. And the only way we're going to do that is to unite and get properly organised, not just in the workplaces. We're facing attacks all over the place in the workplaces, whether it be in the railways, the ferry sector, offshore, and all the industries we organise in. But we need to organise in the communities as well. And we need to start that from today. We need to get the hand of friendship out, the hand of solidarity out, because really what is facing us here is barbarism. And the only thing that we can oppose barbarism, in my view, is socialism. And we need to start building that today. So it's tax the rich, jail the corrupt politicians, and let's be honest here, we need to look at our own government here in Scotland, because they're about to launch a tax on us across the industries we organise in, and we will be resisting that with everything we have. They're talking about infrastructure cuts in the railway, and as I told the government, the Transport Minister on Thursday, if you cut infrastructure budgets, you kill people, you put trains down the banking. It happened just a couple of years ago. So we'll be opposing that with everything we've got in the industrial sectors. But today is a coming together of communities, and this has got to be the start of something. I don't know what the plans are after today, but I would suggest we really get thinking and we get meetings planned and we start a bit of civil disobedience. Let's be honest, standing in George Square for a couple of hours on a Saturday afternoon ain't going to make any difference to Boris the Ballbag or Nicola Sturgeon or anybody else. But if we get right in their face in a way they don't like, that will change minds. We are the many, they are the few. They think they've got the power, but if we coalesce properly, we are the powerful. And it's time we started doing that on the industrial plane, but equally as important in our communities, because the energy bills are going through the roof, food bills are going through the roof, fuel, the lot, train fares, everything's going up. Apart from if these bastards get away with it, your wages and your benefits. So we are the resistance. So let's get organised. This is great. We're good turnout on a poor day. But it's the next step that's important. We need to organise to win. We do it in the workplaces, trade unions. Now we need to do it as communities. And politicians that are on board with us, we welcome that. It's a clear choice. You're either with us or you're against us. And you work for us politicians. And don't forget that. And if you're not with us, we'll kick your asses out of power or out of your comfy MSP, councillor or MP job. Because that's what we can do. We can show you that power on election days. But elections are a far, far time in the future. And the guy here, End Homelessness Now, one of the richest countries in the world, homeless people all over this city and beyond, absolutely damning and indicting in the politicians at every level. But we should feel a bit of guilt as well, because we haven't got organised to resist, and today has got to be the start of that. So that's the plea that I make to all of you. Let's get organised to resist, and a pledge I'll give you, myself and others for RMT will be right at the forefront of that fight on the industrial plane, but equally as important, organising the communities, organising to resist, to kick the corrupt Tories out. And let's be honest, as I said a minute ago, we need to have a strong word with this Scottish Government as well. They're not getting away scot-free here. So I'll end it there, but let's take this to the next step. Organise to win, kill the cuts before the cuts kill us. That's the message that's going to come from here today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gordon. Thanks very much, Gordon. First class as usual. I thought you will. I mentioned earlier, Lilian is the next speaker from UNISON. Lilian is an NEC member and she's also the convener. But I'm pleased to advise that she will be joined by a colleague of hers, Lynn Marie O'Hara, who is a UNISON shop steward on Glasgow District Council. And we all know that ballots are underway with UNISON, Unite and the GMB for strike action over the unacceptable delays in settling the equal pay claim. And my message from this platform is that the SNP administration should hang their head in shame over this inordinate delay. So, colleagues,
you're right, by the way, you're right. Rostock Tories, Red Tories, you name it.
Thanks very much, brothers, sisters, colleagues. Thanks very much for coming out today, and thanks to the Scottish People's Assembly for organising this event. My name's Lilian Macer. I'm the convener for UNISON Scotland, and I'm also a health worker working in the NHS. I'm joined on the platform with my sister, UNISON sister. Right. I'll start again. So, thanks very much, colleagues, for coming out. My name's Lilian Macer, convener for UNISON Scotland, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted also to be joined by my UNISON sister, Lynn Marie O'Hara, who will talk to you about that fight for equality, fight for justice for low-paid women from that City Council, and Lynn will talk you through what she's asking you to do in the next weeks and months to support these women. Colleagues, sisters, brothers, it is absolutely appalling that we stand here today with inflation set to soar beyond 7%, with the energy bills increasing by almost 60%, and by an increase to our national insurance contributions by 1.25% in April. And on top of that, health workers set to see their pensions increase, and the lowest paid health worker will see the highest hike, and the executives and the consultants will get a rebate, but the low paid workers will get a bigger increase in their pension contribution. Appalling. People should hang their heads in shame, as colleagues have said, in terms of putting additional pressure on working people and low-paid members. This is all on the back of the big six energy companies announcing £1 billion in profit, before they announced to us that our energy bills will go up. Our household energy bills will significantly increase, but they'll take the profits and then they'll tell you, you have to watch what you're doing, pull in your purse strings, and don't ask for a pay rise, because we're all in this together. And we've heard that before. There is no doubt the last couple of years have been really tough, and as a health worker I can tell you that we are all absolutely exhausted. Physically and mentally exhausted. Our health and well-being, as Roz says, has been attacked. Our safety has been compromised, because at the start of this pandemic we were left to get on with it. Nobody thought that we were going to be in the position that we were, but we were unprepared. Resilience was low, and health workers, social care workers and key workers were left to pick up the pieces. We know only too well who carried this country through the pandemic. It was public sector workers, it was key workers, it was shop workers, it was rail workers, it was transport workers, it was bus drivers, it was all of those key workers that carried this country through. But remember, don't ask for a pay rise, because there's no money to give you a pay rise. What we are saying is, UNISON Scotland is sending a clear message to the government. Holding down wages won't stop the cost of living soaring. Holding down wages puts people at risk, puts our members at risk. Workers are struggling to put the food on the table, they're struggling to keep the lights on, they're struggling to heat their children. And it's time that we know that in order to keep public services going, we need to pay public service workers. Public service workers in the NHS and care and other services are leaving in their droves because we're falling behind, our living standards are falling behind because our wages aren't keeping up with the living standards that we're currently seeing. It's absolutely appalling that we've been told not to ask for a pay rise. Well, UNISON Scotland is putting this government under notice. We will demand a pay rise. We may be exhausted by the pandemic as health workers and social care workers and other public service workers, but we are up for the fight and we will demand a decent pay rise that sees our members putting food on the table, turning their lights on, heating their homes and making sure their families do not suffer anymore. No more platitudes from Westminster or Holyrood. No more. As an NHS worker, I can tell you, the members I speak to on a daily basis in hospitals across Scotland are up for this fight. And we're telling government now, pay up now. UNISON members should not be paying for yet another economic crisis they did not create. Solidarity. I'm going to ask my colleague, my sister Lynn, to talk to you about the dispute, and hopefully we'll see you back out in the streets supporting all those low-paid women.
Thank you, everybody. There's a sense of deja vu being in George Square talking about what equal pay looks in Glasgow. In 2018, we were in this square and we owned it. It was all about what the pay inequality in Glasgow looks like, and we're still facing that today. Right now, we've got our ballot open across the city between UNISON and our sister trade unions, Unite and GMB. In the coming months, we will be taking to the streets if the people across there don't see sense. What they've decided to do, in light of all that's going on about the physical demands of the job, the emotional drain of all what the pandemic does, is somehow come up with some wisdom to introduce a traffic light system around what equal pay could be in this city. Previously, they paid out £500 million in the 6 grades that they decided were getting equal pay in this city. In those 6 grades, they've now decided, in their infinite wisdom, to have a green system for go, an amber system, and red for stop. So here's what we are suggesting. Get green to get ready for us, with no hesitation in amber, to consider that we are going to hit these streets, we're going to have to be out the picket lines, and we're going to make these demands heard. And I ask for you today that when it comes to the red part of the traffic light and we stop this city, that all of you and beyond this city actually come with us, join together and show these people all what these essential workers don't get thrown under a bus of what it looks like to be an expendable worker, and all the rising costs of what we do in our lives every day have to be appreciated, that the people that deliver these services and have for decades have had pay inequality. It has to stop. If we can't identify something as basic as what a pay packet looks like, and then all the bills we have to pay, there is not a lot of sense coming out of that city chambers. So we, the people of Glasgow, the workers, the women, we are saying stand beside us, because we are coming to town to shut it down. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that valuable contribution. I now call on Stevie Dillon from Unite, who is an organiser in the construction sector. And after Stevie, we'll have Mercedes Villalba, the Labour MSP for North East Scotland, and then we'll have a couple of songs from Calum Baird. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, Glasgow! Comrades, I am angry. I'm bloody angry about living in a society where the Governor of the Bank of England, the hallmark of the establishment class, has the cheek to tell workers they shouldn't be demanding a pay rise. Yet it's fine for greedy bosses to fire and rehire workers on lower pay and worse conditions to increase profits for the shareholders. All supported by that dirty lying rat of a Prime Minister and his toffee-nosed schoolboy mates at Westminster. The millionaire class who make fortunes as private company consultants that rob the public purse, and that refuse to scrap cuts to universal credit and take food out of the mouths of children and people suffering hardship and poverty. And yet again, they're hell-bent on making workers and the poor pay for the cost of this pandemic. And it's up to us to tell them they are not on and lead that fight against these parasites. Because without that fight and struggle, workers face a drop in real income as inflation surges, pushing every cost through the roof. A real term cut to benefits, forcing people to make horrific decisions on whether to heat or to eat. Make no mistake, the inflation hike is not a result of pay demands. It is a rising cost of food, transport, energy and utilities to satisfy the greed that makes that profit for the shareholders. Comrades, real earnings have fallen over the last decade, and the gap between the richest and the poorest in the UK is scandalous. The richest 10% hold more than 44% of the wealth. Inequality has deepened during the pandemic and has also increased levels of poverty within our class. The pandemic has made the rich richer. The billionaires and millionaires and Tory government mates that have been given cash-rich PP and vaccination contracts have got richer on the backs of the heroic workers who kept this country running throughout this crisis. The world's 10 richest men have more than doubled their profit to $1.5 billion. Amazon were licking their lips with increases in profit of 220%. Our workers are treated with contempt, with timed toilet breaks, unsafe working environments and excessive targets. Tesco also saw massive rises, with profits earning $54 billion. They used the fire and rehire tactics against its workers in distribution centres in Livingston and elsewhere. Comrades, amongst all this anger, there is a ray of hope. Heartened that workers are fighting back, and whilst they will never respect the power of our argument, they cannot ignore the argument of our power. When workers and communities join together to deliver a better tomorrow, when workers fight back against fire and rehire practices that have swept this country, and workers that use the collective power within the workforce by standing together to deliver better pay. Just like the young workers in the hospitality industry, exposing the cruel and heartless conditions that they are forced to work under, bringing more and more powerful courageous leaders into our movement. From the safe home pay to equal pay, our movement stands shoulder to shoulder with these campaigns for justice. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it has taught us how to fight. And we must fight to protect the ability to live and prosper within our communities. Comrades, the time is right for more public ownership of the utilities, our energy networks, our transport networks, and to halt the greed we are witnessing, and to share the wealth among those who created. Our class, the working class. And lastly, comrades, I'll finish my contribution on this. It's time to tell those Tory scumbags, enough people have died during this pandemic. And if your actions driving people into poverty cause more death, we will call you out and you will have blood on your hands. And hopefully we can drive a nail into the coffin of what will be the last Tory party. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks, Stevie, for an excellent contribution as usual. The next speaker is Mercedes Villalba, Labour MSP for North East Scotland for the region. And we'll have a brief break after Mercedes has spoken and Calum will give us a couple of songs. Okay, thanks.
me? Yes. Comrades, good afternoon. It's so inspiring to see so many people turning out in the rain to take a stand against the cost of living crisis, which we did not cause. Yesterday it was reported that the UK economy grew by the fastest rate since the Second World War. Yet we're facing brutal cuts and rising costs of living. It's clear that GDP is not the measure of a thriving society. Like the financial crisis, we didn't cause this crisis. We can't pay for this crisis, and we won't pay for this crisis. It was caused by the super rich, by the wealthy, and it was propped up by our cowardly governments. In Westminster, we've had a Tory government for 12 years. Yet they want to increase our energy costs, they want to increase our national insurance payments, and they want to make sure that it's us that pay and that it's us that see the brunt of these cuts.
I think independence might sort some of that out.
But they're not alone. We also have a Scottish government. And in Scotland, in Holyrood, the SNP have been in power for 15 years. And they're calling for water rates to rise. They're putting up rail fares. And they're slashing council funding. Unlike the Tories, the SNP talk left. But their MPs in Westminster didn't support Labour's windfall tax when it came to a vote in Parliament. And in Holyrood, they like to use phrases like a good food nation, affordable housing, and a just transition. But they have the powers right now. We can change things right now. We can have a right to food enshrined in law so that nobody goes hungry. We could have an immediate rent freeze, and we could have rent controls within a year. They could put conditions on government contracts, on publicly funded contracts. Like the ScotWind leasing round, they didn't put any conditions to mandate trade union recognition or local job creation or community investment. Comrades, we cannot wait for independence to redistribute wealth and power in this country. People are suffering now. People are freezing now. We can't wait. We must act now. So yes, we want to send workers to our parliaments, and we want to send trade unionists to our parliaments. And we want people in Parliament who will stand up for our communities. But let's be clear, Parliament isn't going to save us. The Scottish Government isn't going to save us, and the SNP are not going to save us. We must organise ourselves outside Parliament, street by street. We have the numbers in our workplaces. We have the numbers in our neighbourhoods. We have the collective strength to push back against cuts, to push back against poverty pay, and to push back against rising bills through our trade unions, through our community unions, through our tenants unions, through community organising. It took one worker in Dundee to embolden an entire workforce to stand up for their rights against bad hospitality employers. We can all be that worker. We can all be that first spark which ignites the fight back against injustice. We can all be Kita. So keep fighting, keep organising, keep building. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks, Mercedes, for your contribution. We're now going to have a comfort break for 2 minutes or 3 minutes. We've got a couple of songs from Calum. Calum, Baird. Put your hands together and welcome Calum. Thank you.
Afternoon, comrades. How you doing? Come on, how you doing? That's better, it's good to hear. I want to thank the People's Assembly Against Austerity and the STUC for organising this. And if you could do anything today, once you've done, I'd encourage you to go home, find a friend or family member who's not in a union and get them to join one. There's power in a factory, power in the land, power in the hands of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in a union. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. In the cities and the farmlands, the trenches full of mud. War's always been the bosses' way, sir. The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black leg, all workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in our union. Now I long for the morning that they realise brutality and unjust laws could not defeat us. But who'll defend the worker who cannot organise when the bosses send their lackeys out to cheat us? Money speaks for money, the devil for his own. Who'll come to speak for the skin and the bone? What a comfort to the widow or a light to the child. There is power in our union. The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black leg, all workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in our union. Cheers, comrades.
This guy died in Labour to you.
Thank you, comrades. Comrades, the backdrop to this cost of living crisis is more brinkmanship than war being peddled by imperialist powers. It's cuts, cuts, cuts for us. War, war, war. While they get bonuses, champagne and record profits. And this is a song, it's one of my own. It's based on a quote by Woody Guthrie, who said he'd like to see every soldier in the world sit down at the side of the road and talk about all the conflicts they've been involved in, all the killing they've witnessed, and how they no longer want to be involved in war. And this is called The Ever Willing Soldier. I travel the world with my pack and my gun. I've taken in the rain and I've taken in the sun. I've seen deserts and sand dunes, rivers and trees. And I brought native towns down to their knees. And I do it for democracy, I do it for the oil. I do it for freedom and a share of the spoils. I do it for hope and I do it for free thought. I do it cause it's what the boardroom wants. I've helped empires rise and I toppled them too. And I shot men no different to me and to you. And I put an end to peace and I kick-started war. I've taken 1,000 orders no matter what form. was there when the Tsar heard the curtain call, and I flew the plane over Syria as the bombs began to fall. But it was my blood spilled in the fields, and when the battle cries, humanity yields. Like every toy, I'm tied to the game. The war is my ball and the market is my chain. I'm an ever-willing soldier, no longer young and getting older. And one of these days I'll be in a row of Greece. Thank you, comrades. Solidarity. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Calum, for that. First class. Our next speaker is Joe Cullinane from North Ayrshire Council, who is the Labour leader, and he's a strong supporter of the Community Wealth Building Programme. Joe, up you come, brother. Please give a warm welcome to Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Comrades, I don't know where he is, but I always think it's quite bad on the rest of the speakers when you start an event with Kirby. If you could bottle up that sort of energy and passion and start selling it, then our communities, our working class communities, wouldn't be facing the attacks that they're facing today. In politics, there's a lot of headlines and a lot of speaking about crises, but this is a genuine crisis for working class communities all and up and down this country. Inflation at a 30-year high, wages stagnating, food prices rising, energy prices skyrocketing, universal credit being cut. This isn't just one thing, this is a combination of everything, and it's going to be an absolute disaster for families up and down this country. Thousands upon thousands of families are going to be shoved over the edge and put into extreme poverty, and it's not because actions of people in working class communities up and down the country. It's because of the economic system that we've got in this country and the way that we let the wealthy and the powerful away with treating us with utter contempt. All you need to do is look at the response of the UK government to this crisis to see the contempt that they treat working class people with. A £200 loan in your energy bills to be paid back over 5 years isn't going to help anybody with the cost of living crisis. A rebate on your council tax, not based on your income or your ability to pay, but based on the size of your property, isn't going to help put food on the table for Waynes up and down the country. But listen, I'm not here just to point fingers at the UK government or to point fingers at the Scottish government, because I'm in a privileged position of being in power in local government. As the leader of North Ayrshire Council, I know when there's a crisis, there is a role for local government to play in stepping up to the mark. If you look at what happened during the COVID pandemic, it was councils that went and provided access to food, to prescriptions and other essentials to our most vulnerable citizens. And we need to be providing support to our citizens through this crisis as well. The budget that was passed in the Scottish Parliament on Thursday will make that more difficult than it needs to be. After 10 years of austerity, We've got hundreds of millions of pounds of cuts again coming into council budgets. And it will be cuts to your public services, it will be cuts to jobs, it will be cuts to support for the most vulnerable, and it will not be a fair pay deal and a fair pay rise for those key workers that we all stood on their doorsteps and clapped during the first lockdown. I seen earlier on, I don't know where they are, the Glasgow bin workers, and it's folk like that who've been out and collected our waste during that pandemic, put themselves on the front line, that haven't been properly rewarded for the support that they gave to people throughout the pandemic. But listen, we can talk about emergency measures, we can talk about what we need to do in the here and now to support families, and that is important. Windfall taxes, etc. are important. But we need to be talking about and demanding the long-term investments that are actually going to deliver the system change that families up and down this country need. This crisis isn't because of one particular issue. This is because of the economic system that we have in this country. An economic system that allows companies like Shell and BP to record profits, whilst families up and down the country are facing 54% rises in their energy bills. So we need to demand system change. We need to talk about public ownership and who owns the wealth. We need to demand council housing. We need to demand that we retrofit council houses. We need to demand investment in renewable energy. No renewable energy sell off to private companies, foreign companies, but publicly owned renewable energy that locks in the benefits for our communities. Final point I want to make on energy and that long-term investment. We stand here in George Square, across from the City Chambers, which is the home of Strathclyde Pension Fund. And there'll be many here that will agree with me that we need to be coming together as councils across the former Strathclyde region to demand the divestment of that pension fund to fossil fuel companies, etc. But just demanding divestment for fossil fuel companies isn't enough. We need to demand that that pension fund invests in our local economies, and invest in creating jobs for our local citizens. And we also need to demand that that pension fund invests in publicly owned energy. If the Scottish Government will not deliver the promised publicly owned energy company for Scotland, then let's come together as councils across the Strathclyde region to actually use the pension fund to set up our own municipally owned energy company, serving the people, delivering lower costs and delivering publicly owned renewable energy. Solidarity, brothers and sisters. We can win this fight. Keep going.
Thanks very much, Joe. Our next speaker is Liz McGackie, who is the PCS NEC member. Liz works in the DWP in Glasgow. Following Liz, we'll have Tommy Sheppard, SNP MP for Edinburgh East. Following Tommy, we'll have Eleanor Mckenzie, who is Executive Committee member of the Scottish Pensioners Forum. And after Eleanor, we'll have Ben Lunch, the TUC Disabled Workers Committee. Okay, Liz. Please welcome Liz.
Good afternoon. Liz McGackie from PCS, bringing solidarity from the PCS National Executive Committee and from the DWP Glasgow branch. I'd like to thank the People's Assembly for putting this on and for giving me the opportunity to speak. For over a decade, our members have been forced to pay the price of austerity. With years of pay freezes and below inflation pay caps, our members have had a 20% reduction in living standards over the last decade, with the average member £2,300 a year worse off. 40% of our members need to claim universal credit, a benefit that many of them are administering themselves to make ends meet. Each department has its own pay bargaining unit, meaning salaries vastly differ between people doing similar jobs, and the biggest department pays its members less. 2 years ago, when the world came to a standstill, our members were among the key workers, risking our health and the health of our loved ones to deliver a vital service. We were praised in the media. The government thanked us for our hard work. Boris Johnson said we were performing miracles. But kind words and praise do not pay our bills, nor do they put food on our plates. However, rather than thank us miracle workers with a decent pay rise, we were rewarded with yet another below inflation pay cap. With inflation on the rise, energy prices soaring, and NI contributions set to increase, our members are struggling. We have members working from home who cannot afford to put on their heating. On top of this, a civil service pension scheme valuation found that since 2019, our members have been overpaying into their pensions by 2%. However, the government have refused to do the right thing and give us our money back. Instead, they want us to pay for their failings. This Monday, PCS opens a consultative ballot on pay, pensions and the cost of living. We're looking for a cost of living rise of 10%, a living wage of £15 an hour, an annual leave allowance of 35 days a year on entry. Civil service bargaining on pay and terms and conditions, and an immediate cut in pensions contributions of 2% backdated to 2019. We're balloting members on whether they agree to our claim and whether they would be prepared to take strike action if negotiations fail. We're also taking legal action with other unions over pensions and are in discussions to build a coordinated approach on pay, pensions and the cost of living crisis. And the PCS Parliamentary Group have raised issues in Parliament on behalf of our members. It's good to see so many people here today showing a real strength of feeling. People are angry. If you're not already in a trade union, join one. Join the fight back and join us in telling the powers that be that no longer will we be forced to pay for their greed and their failings. There's a real strength in numbers. The people united will never be defeated. Solidarity.
This might be a good time to remind everybody.
Thanks, Liz. Excellent contribution. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce and call him to the platform, Tommy Sheppard. When I spoke about him a couple of minutes ago, I nearly called him Tommy Sheridan. Apologies.
Good afternoon, friends. This has been a long, bitter 2 years where thousands of our friends and relatives have died and many millions have suffered isolation and illness due to the pandemic. Well, let's be clear. Not everyone has had a bad pandemic. There are more millionaires and more billionaires in Britain than there have ever been. Stock prices on the stock exchange have never been higher. And increasing costs of property have meant those with the most capital are laughing all the way to the bank, while working class people have suffered and tried to keep our society going. That is the situation in which we find ourselves today. And now the Tory government and the ruling class in Britain are going to use the aftermath of COVID to rebalance things even further. Already, Britain is the most unequal country of all of the developed countries in Northern Europe, the most unequal. And this government is about to make things considerably worse. That is what the cost of living crisis means. There is a three-pronged attack coming on ordinary people. First, through tax increases. And don't get me wrong, I am in favour of a high tax economy. But who pays tax is a very political choice. And this government has decided that ordinary working people will pay more tax in order that the most wealthy will enjoy the best, lowest tax rates they've ever had. That is why I'm part of an all-party campaign to cancel the national insurance increase and bring in a wealth tax in this country which will tax those with the most. Second, they are driving up prices, and you don't have to be a mathematician to understand that if inflation is at 6 or 7% and wage increases are at 1 or 2 and benefits are being frozen, then people's real living standards are going to fall. And they do that with the shamefaced arrogance to say that in that context people shouldn't ask for a living wage and for a wage increase in order to meet that cost of living. And the third way in which they're doing it is through the energy crisis as well, where we have seen what we are seeing in this country, why we are so vulnerable to it, is despite the fact we have 40% of the world's gas reserves that were coming in, mainly made in the UK, we have no control over it, because unlike many other countries, we don't have a national energy company that controls the production of energy. And I say to you this, my friends, that as we go forward to build the resistance to what is about to come upon us, we need to be clear about one thing. Because I know not everyone in this crowd supports independence for Scotland as I do. But let me say this. Do not be seduced by the Tory argument that somehow the debate about Scotland's constitutional future is a distraction from the real campaign about the cost of living or anything else. It is not. They are two sides of the same coin, because the way in which this country is governed fundamentally determines the fortunes of each and every one of us. And the fact is this, that we are in a situation where we need to have real change, and other speakers have referred to. But we face a situation where the Westminster government and the British state will not make those changes, and the devolution settlement provides a Scottish government that does not have the ability to make those changes. So if we really want to see a national state energy company which will control our renewable resources and exploit them for the people who live here rather than for the global rich, if we want to see a fair system of tax and reward with a basic universal income and proper pensions, if we want to see proper investment in our public services, and if we want to see weapons of mass destruction removed from the environs of the city, then we have to take the power into our own hands. And we have to build a new country where all of those things are achievable. And I want that to be the broadest based campaign. I know that some of you are not yet convinced about that, but believe me, the point of striving for an independent Scotland is not to put a tartan bonnet on the leader of whoever's elected to it. The point of it is to be able to change and recast this economy and this society so that it benefits all of the people who live here rather than the privileged few. So as we build as we should the resistance, I hope we can work together, comrades. I hope that all of us, despite our party affiliation, can build the biggest, broadest based campaign against the Tories. And I hope also that we will seize the opportunity when it is presented to us to take into our own hands the ability to change things, not just for one day, but forever.
Good speech, Tony. Getting a lot of support.
Thanks very much, Tommy. Excellent contribution.
Sorry for always jiggling around.
I want to
trying
call
to plug in
on
my battery
Eleanor Mckenzie,
charger
who
there.
is the Scottish Secretary of the Scottish Pensioners Forum. Please give a warm welcome to Eleanor.
There we go. This is Scottish Pensioners Forum.
First of all, I'd like to say, on behalf of the Scottish Pensioners Forum, thanks very much for organising this event today and for inviting the Scottish Pensioners Forum to come along and take part. Our pension has lost its purchasing power over recent years. The effect of this, together with changes to the state pension system, And changes to the retirement age have led to rising levels of poverty and poverty-related issues. This was long before the pandemic struck, and now we face a desperate cost of living crisis. The raising of the state pension age has had consequences. For example, low-paid workers are more likely to have to work longer because they can't afford to retire than those who are better paid. The WASPy Women's Campaign is still fighting for justice after the raising of the pension age robbed them of years of retirement and pensions for which they had already paid. Changes to the pension credit rules for mixed-age couples have meant the loss of access to pension credit as a couple for many people, and this represents a significant loss of income for far too many households. Successive governments have avoided improving the state pension and instead have offered older people individual concessions, such as the free TV licence for over 75s. The free licence became part of the DWP remit, a welfare benefit and part of the government's welfare role in tackling social isolation among older people. This is clearly the responsibility of government, and it was funded by general taxation. Then in the summer of 2019, the BBC announced that it would be responsible for funding concessionary TV licences, and that it would introduce means testing based on receipt of pension credit. This is a government spending cut, a benefits cut, and more than this, the government gave power to change social policy to the BBC in order to appear blameless. So, pensioners are being squeezed to the limit. Millions of us have to survive on a basic pension of either £137, that's for those retiring before 2016, or £179 a week on the new pension scheme. And many get much, much less than that. Now, the triple lock, which linked the annual pension increase to the highest of either wages, inflation, or 2.5%, is suspended. Some wage increases hit 8.1% last autumn, and the Tory government judged it could not afford that increase for pensions. So our increase is set at 3.1% in April, and by that time inflation could be hitting 6 or 7%. The suspension of the triple lock on annual pension increases at a time of rocketing prices, the growth of pensioner poverty, the worsening crisis in health and social care is just brutal. As one pensioner said just recently, there's too much month left and my pension is spent. But the government can do something about it, starting with reinstating the triple lock, reinstating the free television licence for all over 75s, offsetting the fuel price free for all caused by the lifting of the energy cap. After all, energy companies BP and Shell have just announced profits of over £40 billion, and Rishi Sunak has written off £4.5 billion of fraudulent claimed COVID loans. Many people will die in this crisis unless politicians at Holyrood and Westminster act now. And there is evidence to back up this point. We've known for a long time about excess winter deaths, cold-related deaths, premature deaths. As pensioners, we say they're poverty-related deaths, and the number can fluctuate between the years. Across the winter 2017 to 18, the figure was just under 60,000. And in 2018 to 2019, it was around 30,000 in the UK. The note attached to those stats, official stats, reads, "We may assume that hypothermia is the primary cause of cold-related death, whilst the greatest impact is among the older age groups. Still on premature winter deaths, the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health concludes, high seasonal, and I quote, high seasonal mortality in southern and western Europe could be reduced through improved protection from the cold indoors, increased public spending on healthcare, and improved socio-economic circumstances, resulting in more equitable income distribution. This cost of living crisis is not one that will be felt equally. Those in poverty already spend the highest share of their incomes on daily essentials. The American writer James Baldwin once said, anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. Never a truer word. There is little slack left. Well-meaning tips to get by, such as wearing another jumper, a woolly hat, socks, turning your heating boiler down when you can't even put your boiler on, storing hot water in a flask, just won't cut it. We need living wages and pensions. We need a government willing to take on the energy giants, the food industry, the private health and care providers, the arms trade, and we desperately need the implementation of the many detailed proposals for immediate action put today by other speakers. The cost of living crisis is a class issue and must not be defined as a personal problem. Our priority must be to fight for a future that is based on solidarity and dignity. In 2022, we can no longer live in a society defined by extreme inequality. We must collectively act to prevent the further impoverishment of the working class. This is the position of the Scottish Pensioners Forum. Thanks for listening.
Well done.
Thanks very much, Eleanor. Very positive and a good contribution. The next speaker is Ben Lunn from the TUC Disabled Workers Committee, and he will be followed by Ruth Gilbert from the Living Rent Campaign, and we'll have John Carson, who's an Executive Committee member of the CWU. He represents the Young Workers Committee on the CWU, and we'll finish up with Lee Caitlin from the hospitality sector. Obviously, like others, the cost of living crisis would have detrimental impact on those low-paid workers. And I'll close the rally with a few words from myself. So please welcome and put your hands together for Ben Lunn. Ben.
Comrades, friends, we have heard time and again the problems and the attacks that are being put on the working class. That has been not just happening with the energy crisis we face now, not just with COVID, but with a decade of austerity attacking us primarily instead of getting the money back from the rich that have caused the problems for us. For the disabled, these problems are exacerbated. We have seen with the changes of disability benefit, thousands upon thousands of disabled people like myself have simply died through neglect. That has been a direct and purposeful choice of this government, both in Holyrood and in Westminster. We have seen also with the government in Holyrood refusing to take in its disability benefit and not devolving it. We have simply been left abandoned. And for example, myself have not been able to get PIP benefits simply because I am an educated person and therefore not disabled enough to get any form of state support. During the pandemic, we saw disabled people being told from February 2020, it is not safe to leave your house, stay indoors. Many of my friends have died and did not get to see any fresh air or any outdoors for the last year of their life. This was through simple governmental neglect and simply just forgetting about us as individuals. And it wasn't until March, when the crisis of the pandemic was reaching fever pitch, that they had to intervene and begin to give us a little bit of crumbs to help us through the crisis. Now that we are coming out of the pandemic, and now we've been presented this particular energy crisis, this is a further death knell for disabled people. We've heard thousands of stories of teachers describing how their pupils are crying about going home to cold homes with no food or anything like that for them. For those of us who need to freeze their medication, who need the right kind of heating and storage, this is a further death knell and will destroy many lives and hearts and homes. As the wonderful motto we heard last year was, eat out to help out. For many people this year, it is eat now to heat your house. For many disabled people, it's eat now, heat now, and maybe you'll see tomorrow. This is a truly despicable situation we found ourselves in, and it is simply through neglect, and that is beyond the pale, and we should be horrified that simple people in power, our elected representatives, have decided to do that. But we do have one form of solace, that is through grassroots organisations. It's through organisations like the People's Assembly. It's through our wonderful STUC, as well as the TUC across Britain. It is through our trade unions, our trades councils, and through various different grassroots organisations like Live and Rent and various other different groups. We can take solace in these. These are our weapons to give our lives dignity, to give ourselves safety in the workplace, and to actually to defend our rights. Thank you very much, everyone, and keep on fighting.
I'm going to leave it there now.